Welcome to the Wizards Brew podcast. I'm Carl Jolm.
And I'm Danny Nahus.
Now, before we get into today's main topic, we do want to talk about the banned and restricted announcements that came out last week. Now, first up, we have Standard we want to talk about. This is the emergency banning of Felidar Guardian.
The reason why they did it was a very good reason, except that there is a fault line that came with it. They did it on, I believe, Wednesday night, kind of late Wednesday night. Alrighty, great. You just picked up your Saheeli's, you picked up your deck, you're ready to go, everything's beautiful. Oh, but almost 50% of the meta in NTGO is saying that Felidar, or the Saheeli Cat combo is going on. Wizards looked at this and said, you know what, we made a mistake. We should have just banned it automatically. We figured the new cards might help out. Well, there's also another problem with that being said. The new cards were just released 3 days beforehand on MTGO, and people were just getting into it and starting to brew and make up ideas and figure out what's going on. Mm-hmm. This is a poor decision from Wizards.
It was a bit of a slip-up. I do think Felidar Guardian did deserve to be banned. I don't think that they should have done it this way. I think they should have just had Felidar Guardian in the original bans because, you know, what they're saying, that the combo decks made up 40% of the 5-0 and 4-1 deck lists. As far as I was seeing, like the numbers I was seeing before Amonkhet got released, it was pretty close to that anyways. So I don't really understand why it suddenly became a problem.
Well, the reason why is because the new cards weren't, quote-unquote, taking the effect that they wanted to see. Now you gave them, like, counter spells and removal spells, and honestly, they slipped up. They made a really bad mistake. With that being said, I think Felidar Guardian, my apologies, should have been the card that was not banned. It should have actually been unbanned right now, and Saheeli should be the one that gets banned.
Yeah, but Saheeli's a planeswalker.
That's a bad reason. That is a really bad reason, because there's other decks and other things. There was actually a cat tribal deck that could have done some really sweet things. Like, was it good? Probably not. But you could have flickered your cat lord and had 4 kitties. Like, that's sweet. That's so cool. But instead they were like, oh, we'll just keep, Saheeli around, and she won't see any play in any deck because she's actually just horrific anyways.
Yeah, I don't think they made the right decision on which card to ban, but they're trying to stay away from banning mythics because of the feel bads that people get when that happens. But it's like Felidar Guardian was definitely a big part of the combo, yes, but Felidar Guardian has a lot of uses outside of the combo, where Saheeli Rai really doesn't have very many uses outside of the combo. She's a little weak without that combo shell around her.
Yeah, no, she's actually, like, horrible. Like, deal 1 and scry 1. That is really bad for 3 mana. Like, really, really bad. So, that being said, what are they going to do?
Yeah, and there's arguments that there should be other cards that should have been banned. People have said
Scrap Heap
Scrounger, Gideon Allies in the car, Heart of Kirin. I think that the format's fine with all of that in the format because we did just see Mardu Vehicles 5 out of the top 8 in the SCG Open this past weekend, but I don't think that's a very good approximation of where Standard actually is. That was more just people bringing their comfort picks into the tournament instead of trying to explore possibilities. Because if you look at the whole top 64 from day 2, there's a lot of variety.
There's some really sweet decks out there right now. It's actually a very open meta. The thing is Mardu Vehicles, one, is very consistent, very aggressive, and it's probably one of the cheaper decks to pick up. So when your favorite deck gets banned, what do you go to next? You go to the next best thing, which is what your, quote-unquote, your nemesis was at the time, which was Mardu Vehicles. Mardu Vehicles and Saheeli Cat were the top top 2 decks that were in the format. It was like a 2.5, 3 deck format. And with Mardu Vehicles now being like the top tier premier deck, people were like, well, I can just put like Glory Bringers in my 75 among with some other like removal and like hate spells, and this deck is fine. Like I can run this weekend, because I've already paid for my hotel, my ride, my flight. I've done all this already. But, I was going to run 4-color Saheeli because Wizards said it was okay. But now they banned it on Wednesday. I only have a day and a half to get everything together. Yeah, people are going to totally run Mardu vehicles. And I bet you every time you sat down in front of somebody, they were like, well, I was running Saheeli before. And that's not... That's the feel bads, is when that kind of banning happens. When people are ready to go on Monday and know that the meta is about to change, and the meta doesn't change. Well, then 2 days later, the meta changes. Wizards can't be doing that because that is a bad business practice. Now, when it comes to the secondary market, holy crap, I've never seen so many cards get flooded onto the market so fast and taken off of the market so fast.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy how this all turned out. Hopefully Wizards did learn their lesson with this whole kerfuffle around the banning of Eldar Guardian.
Sorry, I'm very opinionated about this because it's just a very touchy subject for a lot of people. But I feel because I don't play very much Standard, I can kind of just talk about it. I didn't get hit by bannings in any way, shape, or form, which is great. But with that being said, the thing about bannings, if they're going to do this where they want to take a look and to see what it really looks like to be playing Standard the first week of Standard, maybe they should be changing their mind into doing the bannings the second week that Standard is released, or putting it on that Friday instead of doing it on the Monday before everything gets released and everybody starts playing Magic. Because it will allow you to see what the meta is going to look like, and if it's that bad, take the slap down, get going. People can still go to that Star City event, play their Saheeli deck, do whatever, and then be like, that Monday, be like, all right, look, we made a mistake.
Now, next up, we are going to talk a little bit about Modern having no bannings or unbannings. There's definitely some stuff to talk about here, as far as stuff that's on the chopping block, cards that may be up for unbanning that we're thinking about. I think the first thing to talk about definitely is Death Shadow. That guy has kind of been the boogeyman of the Modern format lately.
Yeah, basically it's changed the way Modern is. It's changed the meta into this very aggressive creature removal based combat scenarios where people are running Blessed Alliance main board to make sure that your opponent gains 4 life, like that kind of crap.
Yeah, or playing Condemn of all removal spells. Condemn is kind of like a bad source of plowshares.
Yeah, I mean, like, I can understand why they're playing it. It's like, oh, I got a 13/13, let's go. And it's like, yeah, you're going to gain 13 life and put it at the bottom of your library. It's like,
Yeah, it's not exactly that great. It's kind of weird, like how they even brought up in the article that in the ban restriction article they said technology like Condemn is starting to emerge, and it's like, yeah, but if you're playing Condemn, I don't know if that means it's healthy for the format.
Maybe it is. Condemn's pretty decent, but is it that good? That's the problem.
It's a very narrow answer to Death Shadow, in my opinion, so I don't like that is being played.
Yeah, but I mean, Wizards has said this before. The reason why Cat Combo didn't get banned beforehand was because Teamer's Tower was doing good enough. And it's like, good enough isn't the answer we're looking for. We're looking for yes or no, not good enough. Good enough doesn't get you there. Yeah.
Now, as far as cards that could come off the ban list, I'm always on board for Bloodbraid Elf coming off the ban list. I think that Bloodbraid Elf is actually not that unfair at this moment in time. Yes, you still could have the blowouts of Bloodbraid Elf into Blightning, or you could be playing like your best imitation of the Legacy Waterfalls deck and Bloodbraid Elf into Ancestral Vision if you get lucky. But I don't think Bloodbraid Elf is that bad of a card in Modern right now.
I think it's fine. I mean, a 4-mana 3/2 that's got haste, like, that's fine. It's actually technically bad, but because it gets you a free spell, it could be technically good. Will it make, like, normal Jund a good deck? Probably not. Of course, people will play it. It's good. But, again, good enough isn't what we want. And people with the Blightning interaction, that could be the real problem. Another card we were discussing was Deathrite Shaman. But Deathrite Shaman is very, very powerful.
I'm not as on board for Deathright Shaman coming off the ban list.
At the same time, though, I kind of am. The reason why is because there's people playing so much graveyard love. People love to play with their graveyards. Why not put this 1-mana creature that is very difficult to deal with and swings the board into what you want? So Goryo's Vengeance decks, or Gifts Ungiven deck, things like that. This is where Deathright Shaman starts to make bigger plays. It also forces you to play around stuff, but this is because I play Legacy, so maybe for somebody in Modern, this is something that's very annoying. In Legacy, you just kind of accept the fact that Deathright Shaman's going to be everywhere, and you learn to play around it. So, Deathright Shaman probably won't get unbanned, but if it ever did, today would be a good day to have it be unbanned, honestly. I think it'd be fine. Would it warp the format? Maybe a little bit. Would it be too good? That's up for debate.
Yeah, that's about where I said that I think it would be too good, but we'd have to see, definitely. Now moving on to Legacy, the big news. Sentinel's Dividing Top got banned.
This is a big deal. The main reason why is Sentinel's Top was the key piece to having miracles work consistently. Not only being able to look at the top 3 cards at any point, but the interaction between Sentinel's Divine Top and Counterbalance it was very, very powerful. The problem is when you activate Top and Counterbalance is on the field and you cast a 1-drop spell, that spell will always get countered. From that point on, 1-drops are always countered. That's a problem in Legacy, especially when Brainstorm and Ponder and Preordain are your premier draw spells.
Yeah, it makes it very tough to get around that. And I think one of the downsides of Sentinel's Dividing Top being the card that got banned is the fact that it hits a few other decks in the format as well. There's a few other decks that were using Sentinel's Dividing Top, and their reasoning for it was, this card makes games go on long because people keep activating their top. And honestly, that's just a problem of people who are using top not being as practiced with it.
Right.
Now, I could totally see that being a legitimate reason for banning top, but I think it's also down to people just not practicing enough with their decks.
Yeah, I believe that if you are going to be using Sentinel's Dividing Top, it has to be in the right scenarios, it has to be in the right decks, and the right plays. Now, that being said, other decks were using Sentinel's Dividing Top as advantage or ways of manipulating their cards so that way they were able to have a better draw or be able to hide a card because they're dealing with a Hymn to Turok type of deck. Decks like Painter's Servant, the Painter's Servant Grindstorm decks, Storm. I know that Storm would play it from time to time, depending on the way the format would look. I think some other weird kind of control-y, combo-y style decks would play top as just okay, cool, I technically have 3 additional cards that I can draw at any point. I'm able to do whatever I need to do and have these available to me.
Yeah, I know High Tide played it. There were a couple lists of High Tide that played Sentinel's Dividing Top just because, you'd be able to, keep sorting the top cards of your deck with all the extra mana you have lying around to make sure you drew the correct stuff, and then once you've got your turnabouts, able to untap your Candelabra of Tawnos, you can use it to untap Sentinel's Dividing Top, and you can, draw like 2 or 3 cards off of one top that way. And it was very effective in High Tide that way. But definitely, it is a shame to see Sentinel's Dividing Top going. It is not so much of a shame to see Miracles going, but it is a shame to see the card Sentinel's Dividing Top leaving us.
People have been debating which card to possibly ban from Miracles to make it more accessible and still playable. I think that the card that should have been banned is either Counterbalance or Terminus. Mm-hmm. Either one of those would have been fine. Actually, all 3 of them being banned in any way, shape, or form would have been fine for the format. But the one that would hurt the most, which is what Wizards went for, is they really slapped people down and said, okay, we're tired of people going to time and legacy events. We're tired of seeing you spin your top when you have nothing. It's done. You've overplayed it. And that's the problem. People overplayed it. You would see miracle events, or just events in general, where people would spin their top almost every spell. And that's not what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to do it twice a turn, meaning, especially when you're playing Miracles, it's about twice, maybe 3 times, before you draw, or at your or opponent ends end step, whatever it may be, or when there's a major spell that's about to be resolved that you know that you can set up for. You're supposed to keep track of those 3 cards. You know what's on top of your library. There's no reason to be spinning that top unless you're going to resolve something.
It always pained me as a blue player to see people, spinning their top like 5 times. Like I see someone go spin top, like on your end step, spin top, and then look at the top 3, put them back, and then they go, okay, wait, spin top again. Shuffle them around for like a minute or 2, put them back. Oh wait, spin top again. And then it's like, dude, just start your turn. Like you should know which of those 3 cards you need. Like it shouldn't be that hard.
Exactly. And the thing is you know what, they could reprint. Here's how they fix top. And I was talking to somebody about this. Since the divining top should read 1 to activate, 1 to play it, and 1 to draw a card. It also should say when you activate it, you may only activate it once per turn.
Okay, so just put can only be done once per turn on the look at the top 3 part?
Correct.
Okay, I can see that.
Or make it 2 mana to look at 3 cards.
Okay, yeah. Sadly, Magic is not like Hearthstone. We can't just patch note these things away.
Correct.
We have to deal with the cards as they've been printed. And Wizards is always fairly hesitant to print functional reprints with slight fixes like that. So it's going to be hard to see if we get a card like that anytime soon.
Yeah, it would be very difficult to do that. I can see it happening in like some form of like a Commander supplement format, things like that. But honestly, at the end of the day, Sensei's top is gone. There's nothing we can do about it. And I'll be 100% honest, that card is never coming off of the ban restriction list, ever.
Yeah, probably never. I'm just hoping maybe we get some new artifact in Hour of Devastation that fills its role. Maybe. That'd be nice.
I'd be okay with it if they printed it in Standard and banned it instantly. I'd be so okay with that. Being like, okay, yeah, we reprinted top. It's now called Masters Divining, or Masters Delightful Top. Whatever you want to call it. Make it what I said, 1 mana, then 2 mana to activate, only once per turn, and then 1 mana to draw a card off of it, and then be like, banned. Right in Standard, right as soon as the set's spoiled.
Yeah, now we're going to talk about, very briefly, Vintage. Got some restrictions now. We have Gitaxian Probe and Gush, both restricted to 1 copy per deck.
Fantastic. I love it. I think this is very important for Vintage. When it came down to the cards that need to be looked into for Vintage, people for a long time have been really like, oh, something from Mishra's Workshop, or Mentor, or Gush, and then people really kind of overlooked Gitaxian Probe. I was watching one of the Vintage Super League games, and I think it was one of the pro. I forget who it was off the top of my head, but they went, one of the cards that should be restricted is not Preordain, my apologies, Gitaxian Probe, and the reason being is because it's a free draw spell, which is huge in Vintage, and it fuels the graveyard for Dig Through Time and Treasure Cruise, which is huge, and it's also very powerful in either Mentor or non-controlled decks, like combo decks that were like what was the card called? Paradoxical Outcome.
Yeah,
these kind of cards, Gitaxian Probe, help fuel these decks and push these decks to their limits, because they're like, oh, you got nothing, I'm just gonna jam. There's nothing more. Just like we were talking when it was banned in Modern, there's nothing more disappointing being like, all right, I got this, and they're like, 2 mana, draw a card. Oh, by the way, I get to look at your hand too. And it's like, oh, that sucks.
Yeah, just being able to freely look at your opponent's hand and draw a card, very strong. Especially as they even said in the Banner Restricted article, in the Monastery Mentor decks, it kind of made them a bit ridiculous, because in Vintage you could very easily slam down a Monastery Mentor on turn 1 and then proceed to make a whole bunch of monks off of Gitaxian Probes.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, there's some. It was very, very annoying to watch. It was very annoying to play against. It was very annoying to play. That being said, though, the meta is free and new again. people are playing everything under the sun now. I mean, Big Blue is coming back in full force when it comes to Vintage. That's a good sign. That's a good sign for a healthy meta. Mentor was also one of the other cards that may have been banned or restricted. My apologies. There's no banning in Vintage. Being restricted in Vintage over Gush. Those two cards will forever be in that toss and turn of Gush will be unrestricted, Gush will be restricted, unrestricted. And it's like, okay, well, if this is getting restricted, this needs to be unrestricted, Mentor restrictions. It's going to be back and forth forever now. But that's good because Wizards wants Gush to be in the format. That's what it is. People want Gush. Wizards wants Gush. The thing is they need to find when it can come in. And if it's too soon, they're like, okay, you know what? This card's going to get restricted again. We're going to restrict it again. No problem. We'll try again later.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. It's Gush is one of those cards that's going to be going back and forth on that list. But definitely the Vintage metagame got opened up quite a bit with this. Just because you're not forced into either Mentor or Workshop, which was like the main deck to play against Mentor. It was like, now you can actually play some other decks, which is really nice.
Yeah, it's very exciting. Vintage is actually a really cool format that people should look into when it comes to MTGO or playing casually or things like that. That's when you play it. I don't expect you to go up today and go buy a Black Lotus. If you can, congratulations, you're awesome. But look into Vintage. It's actually pretty fun.
Yeah, very fun format. Very fun even to just watch.
Yeah. Geez, watching it. I love watching Vintage because it's just so different from every other format. It's mind-boggling and a puzzle. It's a puzzle every time you play.
Mm-hmm. Now, that's enough talk about the banned and restricted list. We are now going to move on to the main topic of the episode. We're going to be talking about Control, the Control deck, the archetype of Control. Similar to an episode we did way back when where we focused on combo, this is what is Control. We're going to cover everything about it, the basics of the archetype, along with some history with some of the notable decks that have been played this way.
So what we're really looking into is just like where Control started, where it is right now, how it's finished, and how refined it's become over the years. I mean, we're going to be talking about like the deck here in just a second. Like, that's 94.
Yeah.
That shows you something.
Yeah, that's an old deck. But first off, we need to cover what Control does. So the basic gameplay of a Control deck is you deal with your opponent's threats as they come, usually with 1-for-1, sometimes 2-for-1 removal in the way of counter spells, kill spells, anything like that. Like, most of the beginning parts of the game is you just stopping your opponent from doing anything. So, like, after that, it just becomes quality over quantity when it comes to cards, or making sure that you get a 2-for-1 instead of getting 1-for-2, things like that. Yeah, there's a lot in Control where you put down a threat that you run as maybe a 2 to 4 of in your deck, and your aim is to protect it from your opponent's interaction after you've dealt with all of their threats earlier on in the game. And this has kind of been how Control has always played in some way. Now, the method of going about this has been different throughout the years. And one of the first Control decks that we've seen, and this was all the way back, as you said, in 1994, this was known as the deck. This was arguably the first Control deck in competitive Magic. This deck is, man, is it old. It's definitely far different from a lot of Control decks we're gonna be going to be seeing in the future. Besides the part that's playing power, that's just not fair. But for what it's worth, I mean, compare this to let's cut the power out of the format and be like, all right, let's compare old school Magic to right now the deck compared to Miracles post ban. There's going to be a huge discrepancy between the two. Yeah, definitely. Now, we're going to have in the description a link to a really great article by Steve Menendian. This guy is one of the Vintage greats. This guy is amazing at playing Vintage, and he does this whole giant article about the history of the deck from its early beginnings all the way to the last time it actually really saw play. But one of the key things with the deck is it was one of the first decks to really use the concept of card advantage to have this theory about, okay, this card here, it's making my opponents lose cards. You're causing your opponent to discard cards, or you're destroying your opponent's threats, which is effectively like drawing a card in a fashion. And then you have your own card draw, and then you protect your threats. So the card advantage engines in this deck, they changed over the years, but at first you were using cards like Mind Twist and Disrupting Scepter to cause your opponent to discard cards. You generate card disadvantage for your opponent, which in effect generates card advantage for you. Now, as the deck went on, it started off with Juggernaut as a win condition, which was, at the time, actually a fairly decent win condition.
It was hard to... If you got to resolve Juggernaut on the field and then you're able to like sword your opponent's creature or something like that, you're probably going to win the game.
It was a 4-mana 5/3, and it had to attack every turn, but it was a 5/3. That was a huge body right there. As the deck went on, it eventually replaced that with Serra Angel, which was just a kind of a better Juggernaut in the deck. It was a bit better at blocking your opponent's threats because of the vigilance that it had, and it proved to be very resilient.
Yep, exactly. It became, like, honestly, Angel is just really, really good. I mean, it's technically a limited bomb, and why it's not allowed to be, like, in, like, formats.
Yeah, we haven't seen Serra Angel in a while in limited because she is just nasty. But we have seen better Serra Angels, but as rares and mythics and everything. Archangel Avacyn and all that. But then as the years went on, the deck started to morph a bit to match its meta. There were other control decks in the meta, so it started playing red elemental blasts to deal with their counter spells and their blue permanents. And then you had, eventually, as a win condition, it added in Mirror Universe, one of the weirder cards from back in the day. It was a 6-mana artifact, and you could tap it and sacrifice Mirror Universe to exchange life totals with your opponent, but you can only do it during your upkeep. So this was an interesting tool against aggro decks to kind of quasi-preserve your life total, because you would just swap with them if they're going to kill you the next turn. But this also allowed you to have a combo win in the deck with City of Brass. So the rules were very weird back in the day. When you hit 0 life, you didn't lose by hitting 0 life. You would lose if at the end of a phase you were at 0 life. So what you would do is you would get yourself down to 1, usually through mana burning yourself. At the time, any leftover mana in your pool at the end of a phase would deal damage to you. Then on your upkeep, you would tap the City of Brass to deal 1 damage to yourself, and then you would sacrifice Mirror Universe to give your opponent 0 life, and then they would lose. It was a very interesting combo kill in the deck.
Yeah, I mean, it's very... Also, old Magic rules are weird.
Yep.
This is one of the old rules that a lot of people kind of forget. I mean, like, both me and Carl, we only started playing fairly recently comparative to a lot of other people. So I'm glad that rule has changed. Yeah. I kind of wish Mana Burn was around, but that's just me personally.
But then the deck changed even more as we got into Necropotence decks, which we did talk about in our combo episode. The deck started running less Disrupting Scepters and less Discard, because Discard wasn't really useful against Necropotence, and just changed to playing Fireball's main deck, because Fireball was a very effective win condition against Necropotence.
Yeah, I mean, you have to pay a bunch of life in order to get a bunch of cards, and it's like, alright, I'll go to 7. It's like, great, I will play my Mox, Fireball you. It's like, oh.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. Now, the deck, there's not really a good analog for it in the newer formats, but there is a format called Old School, which is all about, old school, as it says, like pre-1996 cards is pretty much what you have access to in that format, and the deck still sees a lot of play in old school tournaments.
Yeah, no, it does. It's actually really not bad. It's still a very powerful deck.
Now, if you want to know more about the deck, again, we will have the we'll have a link to Steve Menendian's article in the description. This is a very great resource if you want to read about a very historical deck in Magic history.
Don't forget that also Steve Menendian is the guy that made a book about Gush.
What was it, like 300 pages?
Oh, it's something like that, and it's actually really in depth, and it's not stupid. So, I mean, the guy's very smart.
Yeah, a whole book on how to use the card Gush, and very great resource if you're interested at all in the vintage format. But next up, we have another deck from the history of Magic, and this has been colloquially known as Flores Blue, and this is named after Mike Flores, one of the greatest players in Magic history, honestly. This guy has innovated a lot in the decks that he has brought to the table, and he always had really great performances. So Flores Blue was one of the first decks to introduce the concept of a tap-out control deck, and you may have heard this phrase, tap-out control. And what it means is it's a control deck that, for the first couple turns of the game, it's controlling the board with counter spells, removal spells, and all that. And then once it has the board clear, it can just freely tap out for its win condition, and then just go, well, that's good enough that there's nothing you can do to stop me. It's just the matter of getting to that win condition is the thing that makes the decks a little difficult to play sometimes, and why you don't always see a tap-out control deck being played.
Yeah, it's actually really hard to play a tap-out control deck right now, especially in Standard, just because of how reactive you have to be. You can't just be like, resolve my threat, go, and you're going to lose. It's like, no, it's more of like you got to make sure you're fatal pushing and shocking or magma spraying and countering spells. Like it's much different.
This was back in Ravnica Standard. This was the first time we saw Ravnica City of Guilds, and one of the big drawing points of this deck was the threats that you were able to play. I mean, you would stall the early game with mana leaks, remands, boomerangs, even to keep your opponent from doing anything. And then once you got to 5 or 6 mana, you would tap out and you would play Maloku the Clouded Mirror, who was insanely good because it turned every land into a 1/1 flyer, which was great. Or you could play Kaiga the Tide Star, a 6 mana 5/5 flyer that when it dies, you just gain control of one of their creatures permanently. Just boom.
Good to me.
Yeah, it was great. And then you played a lot of other really great cards alongside that. You had Threads of Disloyalty, which 1 blue enchantment aura. You enchant a creature with converted mana cost 2 or less, and you control it. So it's a mini mind control against aggro decks, kind of to force their guys to trade into each other. And then in the sideboard, you had stuff like Drift of Phantasm, which was an 0/5 defender, but he had Transmute, so you could transmute him away into some of your counter spells or your Threats of Disloyalty, or you could just play him as a blocker against aggro decks, and he was a great blocker.
Yeah, I mean, it was honestly, I really like the transmute mechanic, and I hope they do bring it back because of just how intricate and what you can do with it and how it works. I mean, it sounds a little off topic, but seriously, like Transmute's like a really good thing to have around.
It will be interesting if they bring it back. This deck and just the beginnings of tap out control, it was a very interesting time. Just because usually your control decks, you would see them wait until like turn 12 or 13 to like play their threat and then have like 2 or 3 counter spells up. But then Mike Flores would show up with this deck and then just on turn 5, here's Maloku, go. It's like, what? I thought, what? It was just it was hard for people to like adjust to playing against this deck.
Yeah, I mean, different styles, that's exactly what it was. It was just a different style from what you normally would play.
Now, for modern versions of tap-out control, we can look at Cruel Control, which was a tap-out control deck that saw some play in Standard and some play in Modern as well, which would tap out for Cruel Ultimatum and use that as its, big win condition. Using Cruel Ultimatum generate a lot of card disadvantage for your opponents, a lot of card advantage for yourself, and then you draw back one of your other big threats that you can tap out for. And Cruel Ultimatum was one of the big reasons why Cruel Control was okay with tapping out for its threats on turn 5 and 6, because you knew on turn 7 you'd get it back.
Exactly.
So the next deck we have is one that a lot of people have been talking about there being a resurgence of this play style of control decks, and this is Solar Flare. So Solar Flare also was during Ravnica Standard, but kind of during the later portion of it. And it was similar to tap-out control decks, but it ran a lot more 2-for-1s, and it had a bit of a faster game plan with a little bit less protection. Usually you would be running 2-for-1 spells like Persecute, which Persecute, you would name a color, and then your opponent would discard all cards of that color. So that would work very well against monocolor decks, 2-color decks, any sort of mid-range deck. You'd be able to hit pretty hard with that card. Then you would run just a lot of removal spells and draw spells. You had Sift, which was draw 3 cards, discard a card for 4 mana. You had Compulsive Research. As your threats, a lot of really big threats like Kokusho the Evening Star, 5/5 flyer for 6. When he dies, each opponent loses 5, you gain life equal to life lost this way. You had Yosei the Morning Star, 6 mana 5/5 flyer. When it dies, target player skips his or her next untap step and tap up to 5 target permanents that player controls. And then it started to run Angel of Despair, which was 3 white, black. Huge mana cost for a 5/5 flyer that when it enters, destroy target permanent. So it was like Vindicate on a stick. Like, really great card right there.
Card's so very powerful.
Oh, yeah. And the thing is, you'd be able to power out these guys fast because you ran Zombify at the time. 3 and a black, sorcery, return creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. That's it, no downside, just boom. So you would discard these guys with your Sifts, with your Compulsive Researches, and then you would just get it back with Zombify.
Yep.
And surprisingly, now the name Solar Flare, there's been a lot of people talking about, oh, where did this name come from? People think because it's an Esper deck, it's talking about, oh, black and white, you know, what's the phrase I'm looking for? Solar Eclipse or something like that. No, it's nothing as crazy as that. We're actually going to have a link in the description to the article by one of the designers of Solar Flare, where he admits the name comes from the fact that he thought Angel of Despair looks kind of like the character Krillin from Dragon Ball, and Krillin's signature move was called Solar Flare, and that's where the name comes from.
Remember, guys, Magic players are nerds. And that is a very dirty thing.
It really, oh my god, it really is. And it's, deck names, like old deck names, they have some of the weirdest origins. And even some newer deck names. But like this one, that's just out there. I love it, though.
Deck is great, though. It's really sweet.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of wish we could have this kind of deck like in Modern and be good.
Yeah, and we do have some decks in Modern that are close to what Solar Flare was, but they haven't been performing too well lately. Although every set we're getting cards that might make them better, and those are both the Gifts Ungiven Unburial Rights decks, and then we also have Blue-White Emeria Control using Emeria the Sky Ruin and Sun Titans to keep recurring your Oblivion Rings and such like that, and stuff like that. So these are very similar in playstyle to Solar Flare. Now, the next deck we have to talk about, this is the menace of Standard in its time, Caw-Blade.
Ugh. Literally, just ugh.
So Caw-Blade really warped its Standard format. This actually originated from a deck called Caw-Go, which was designed by Brian Kibler, one of the greatest Magic players of all time, now full-time Hearthstone streamer. But at the time, Caw-Go was an interesting deck. Used Jace the Mind Sculptor and Squadron Hawks to generate a lot of card advantage. So you would 0 Jace the Mind Sculptor to Brainstorm, put 2 bad cards back, and then you would play a Squadron Hawk and shuffle your library. So shuffle the bad cards away. And it's very similar to, in Legacy, we have Brainstorm and Fetch Lands working together to do a similar effect.
Yeah, I mean, really, there's nothing too much to talk about this deck. Everybody knows what Caw-Blade is. People hate it. People love it. I mean, it's a thing.
Yeah, Caw-Blade has a huge legacy, and where the name comes from, Caw-Blade, is because it was basically Caw-Go, but it added in the Swords from Mirrodin Besiege. That would be cards like Sword of Body and Mind and Sword of Feast and Famine. So these gave you equipment, which allowed you to play Stoneforge Mystic, which was basically another Squadron Hawk for the Caw-Go at Draw Engine. And then you could equip these swords onto your Squadron Hawks, which were already flying. Now they're 3/3s, and they get bonus effects when they hit the opponent. And since they're flyers, it's very easy to hit the opponent. So that made Caw-Blade undeniably the best deck in that standard format, and practically everyone was playing it, and it drove the prices of all of the cards up astronomically, and eventually led to the banning of both Jason the Mind Sculptor and Stoneforge Mystic in Standard, and eventually the preemptive banning of both cards in Modern.
Yeah. And, I mean, right now, people want, like, Jace to come back, or they want Stoneforge Mystic to come back. I think the meta could handle it, but handling and will be okay are two different things. I actually think that maybe Caw-Blade it's just not meant to be for Modern.
Yeah, I agree. I think that there's definitely some merit to the arguments saying, bring back Stoneforge Mystic or bring back Jason Mind Sculptor. I don't think both should be in the same format, but I can never see the merits of bringing one of them back. But if you want to see a deck that's similar to what Caw-Blade was, you can turn to Legacy and look at the Stoneblade variants. We've got a lot of different variants of this deck, and it's very similar to how Caw-Blade played, although it's not playing Squadron Hawks because it has Fetch Lands. It doesn't have to play those. And Stoneblade is all about playing these, cheap resilient creatures, Stoneforge Mystic, slapping equipment onto it, swing.
Pretty much. And man, that deck is not good.
I'm
not a big fan of it.
Right now, Stoneblade is not in a great spot, but it's the closest modern day analog to Caw-Blade that we have.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
But before we move on, I do want to say, if Wizards ever listens to us, one thing that I think is we can give everybody the best of both worlds. We can unban pretty much everything in the format if you want to, but put the restriction that they can't be in the same deck.
Oh, that would be interesting.
Wouldn't that be interesting? Be like, okay, yeah, you can have Copycat, but not in the same deck.
That would be interesting. Like, you could say, these cards, like, all these cards are illegal, but you cannot play X and Y in the same deck, or Y and Z in the same deck. Yeah, I could see that. Maybe a little confusing for newer players, but perfectly fine for competitive. Now, next on our list, this is a deck that just recently got banned out of the Legacy format, and this is Miracles. Miracles, wow. This deck was a huge part of the Legacy format for such a long time, basically since Avacyn Restored came out, and it got access to Terminus and Entreat the Angels.
The deck is very, very powerful, but there's also a reason why the card, top got banned, is because it was a little too powerful.
Yeah, it was definitely a little bit too much. It really did warp the Legacy metagame, and it warped it in a way that, to be quite honest, from the inside, it was a little hard to see, because you were just like, well, of course you have to be able to deal with Miracles. But since the banning, we can obviously see just how much Legacy has changed already. It did have a huge effect on the format. Now, Miracles, for those of you who don't pay attention to Legacy, this was a control deck that utilized a lock called the Countertop lock. You would use Senses Divining Top and Counterbalance. So Counterbalance would be whenever your opponent casts a spell, you can reveal the top card of your library, and if it's the same converted mana cost, you counter their spell. And you would use Senses Divining Top to mix around the top 3 cards of your library to set up this lock to keep your opponent under control. And you could use fetch lands to reset the top of your library to find the piece again. You could always tap Sensitive Divine Top to draw a card and put it on top of your library to have a free 1-drop whenever you wanted for counterbalance. It was a very strong way to kind of prison your opponent out of the early to mid game.
Yeah, and it's fine. Like, I think it was cool. I thought it was a really cool deck. But man, when somebody had the lock on you and you knew you couldn't do anything, it was grinding.
Yeah, it felt so bad. I had once where I was playing Storm, and I had Abrupt Decay in my deck. I had sideboarded in the Abrupt Decays. I had fetched up the Bayou. I just couldn't find Abrupt Decay, and I was stuck under this countertop lock for like 5 turns, and it was just so frustrating.
Yeah, see, like, it'd be different. It would be a different story if top wouldn't say, tap, draw a card, then put it back on top. Because then it'd be like, all right, cool. We don't have to worry about 1-drops. Like, we know what 2-drops on there. We know what 3-drops. Problem is there's also a 1-drop at all times on top of their deck. So you can't Swords a Thing. You can't Dark Ritual. You can't Cabal Therapy. You can't Thoughtseize, Duress, Brainstorm for that matter, Ponder, Preordain. The list goes on how many powerful 1-drop spells we have in Legacy. Deathrite Shaman, dear God.
Yeah.
When they have that lock already in place, just having the top and the counterbalance in place already states that you cannot cast 1-drops anymore.
Yeah, it was really, really tough to deal with. And then if you did manage to get through the countertop lock and have threats on board, they just had Terminus. 1 mana board wipe.
Yeah, they didn't. It's not even board wipe. It's the worst part. It's put all creatures at the bottom of your library for 1 mana instead of 6 mana like it's supposed to. It's 1 mana. It's like, dude.
Yeah,
seriously.
Yeah. The miracle mechanic was. I honestly think Miracle was a bit of a mistake as a mechanic. It's fun when you draw it off the top normally and like limited or anything like that. But outside of limited, when you can build your deck around manipulating the top of your library, yeah, it becomes pretty bad. And
not only that, but when it comes to like this deck as well, you would be like, all right, cool. Oops, I accidentally drew my Terminus. I'll Brainstorm and put it back on top, or I'll Jace the Mind Sculptor and put it back on top. It's like, oh, that's sweet.
Yeah, it was just a bit oppressive, honestly. And you saw a lot of sideboards in Legacy being warped quite a bit to deal with this deck. Decks that really didn't need to be playing Abrupt Decay for anything except for countertop playing Abrupt Decay. You saw a lot of people playing Crows and Grip over certain other pieces of removal just because Crows and Grip was very hard for countertop to deal with. They had to already have a 3-drop on top of their library. And to be quite honest, I'm not too sad Miracles is gone, but it was, without a doubt, a very, very strong control deck during its time.
Yeah. I'm more sad for people that lost a deck because it was their only deck, or people that may have foiled it out and now are SOL. I mean, the good news is a lot of those cards are playable in other formats, and you are able to play them somewhere else. The Miracles things, those are pretty cheap. Brainstorms, Ponders, things like that, they're all fairly cheap or usable in other decks. But I definitely understand, like, you just bought your set of counterbalances, because they're considered an expedition right now. That sucks.
Yeah.
That is a painful slap. I understand.
Now, since we've been talking about control this entire episode, our brew for today is a control deck.
Man, I was hoping you'd say aggro.
Don't worry, we'll have an aggro deck eventually. But this week we have a control deck, and this is a blue-white control deck for standard. Now, if any of our listeners, if you pay attention to other outlets like Channel Fireball and stuff like that, you may have seen other blue-based control decks coming out. We've seen some mono-blue decks. We've seen some blue-red decks coming out. I haven't seen a blue-white deck yet, and I'm willing to take the plunge. Give us a chance. So what we have here, this is a blue-white control deck using Dynavolt Tower, Torrential Gearhulks, and even Kefnet the Mindful as our win conditions.
Now, Kefnet, that's a tough one. That's a tough one to play.
It is a tough one to play. I have a lot of faith in Kefnet. Now, it's possible that he should be sideboard, just for control matchups, but even outside of control decks, he's pretty useful. Against Mardu vehicles, for instance, he's really great at blocking Heart of Kieran's. He can't be hit by Unlicensed Disintegration. He's just great all around.
He's also 3 mana 5/5.
Yeah, he's a 3 mana 5/5. If you don't do anything the first 2 turns, 3 mana 5/5. And then after that, you have Glimmer of Genius on your next turn to turn him on or anything like that. So it makes him very good against those decks. Now, this deck, the reason it's playing white is so that you can play some good removal. You have access to Declaration in Stone, which I feel is a very underrated removal spell right now. You have access to Cast Out, a really great removal spell. Everyone's been all on top of this card and trying to fit it into every deck that could possibly play white. And then we've got some Blessed Alliances. Maybe this should be 1 Blessed Alliance and 1 Immolating Glare, because Immolating Glare is sometimes a little bit better. But very, very good card right here. Nice little Celestial Flare sort of effect.
Yeah, exactly. And Celestial Flare, is just a fine card anyways. So having Blessed Alliance, Blessed Alliance is pretty solid right now in the meta, especially with all these very aggressive decks.
Mm-hmm. Really solid. Now, one of the things that you can do in this deck, and we've seen in some of the other blue decks, and I've been seeing a lot from videos from Luis Scott Vargas, and I really love his gameplay of these decks, is using Torrential Gearhulk and Commit to Memory. So, Torrential Gearhulk, when he enters, you cast an instant card in your graveyard without paying its mana cost. So, Commit to Memory, its first half, put target spell or non-land permanent into its owner's library second from the top, is an instant. Its second half, with Aftermath, is a sorcery that each player shuffles their hand and graveyard into their library and then draws 7 cards. So while it's in your graveyard, it is both types. So you can target it with Torrential Gearhulk, and then you can cast the Aftermath side at instant speed, which is great.
Right. It's not too bad being able to resolve a Torrential Gearhulk and then going right into a Commit Memory, redraw 7. Oh, you're playing a Delirium deck. Oops, I'm sorry.
Yeah, you can turn off Delirium for your opponents. You can do it in response to a Scrap Heap Scrounger activation or something like that. You can also just do it on your opponent's end step, and then you get the first crack at those 7 cards. That's just great right there.
It's really good.
Now, for our land base, we've got 27 lands. I've been seeing this a lot with the other blue-based control decks. Granted, they've also been playing slightly more cycling lands than this deck has. Maybe the land base that I have here should be changed a little bit. But so far with testing, this land base has been doing fine. Lots of islands, lots of blue sources, because that is our main color in this deck. All of our white cards are just single white casting costs, except for some sideboard stuff. Now moving on to the sideboard, we have a couple copies of Forsake the Worldly. Very strong card right now. Deals with Heart of Kieran's permanently. Deals with Scrap Heap Scroungers permanently.
Right.
Fumigate's very good right now. I'm not seeing enough Fumigate being played in Standard, in my opinion. I think Fumigate should be seeing a lot more play than it did this past weekend.
As the thing is right now the meta was skewed tremendously.
Yeah.
This weekend coming up, the first week of May, that's when we're going to see a lot more control decks coming out.
Yeah. A lot more innovation.
Yeah, because it's just there was some stuff that happened. The cat ban changed the entire meta.
Yeah. It really shook things up, and people weren't quite ready for a meta without cat, and we just saw a whole lot of people show up with Mardu vehicles last weekend at Star City Games. So, I think it was just, everyone stuck with their comfort pick for a deck rather than trying to innovate for the first weekend. But we'll see with this upcoming weekend what ends up happening with the competitive scene.
Yep.
Now, continuing on with the sideboard, we do have Gideon's Intervention. As we spoke in the Hidden Gems episode, I think this card is very underrated. it's going to be incredibly good against any other Dynavolt Tower decks. Now, Dynavolt Tower decks do have access to commit to memory now, so that is an answer they can have for Gideon's intervention, but they have to draw their commit to memory. And they have to resolve it against you, another control deck. So this could be a decent answer to Dynavolt Tower, to a couple other decks, as we spoke about in the Hidden Gems episode. Next up, we've got Linvala the Preserver. Great reset button against aggro decks. You know, you get a 5/5 and a 3/3 and 5 life for 6 mana against the aggro decks. Just very useful.
Solid.
Yeah, we got a few negates for the control matchups, and then the experimental part of the sideboard, I've got 4 Thing in the Ice. Now, I've had a lot of people telling me Thing in the Ice is really bad in this meta because of Fatal Push existing, and Harness Lightning's killing it, and stuff like that. Mostly he's there just because I want to test him out. I want to see how the deck does with him, but it is very possible that this really should just be, instead of 4 Thing in the Ice, a second Linvala, some other sideboard options, and like a Descend Upon the Sinful to deal with Ulamog's and stuff. So who knows? I want to try it out though.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of little things that are going on, especially with Thing in the Ice is like this card that has such potential to be really, really good. The problem is nobody really knows where it's standing right now. It's like right at the cusp of a card that just belongs in almost every blue deck, but at the same time, though, it's like the first card you cut from the deck.
Yeah, it's right on the edge. It's so close to being good. Like when it first got printed, like right when it got printed, and it saw a lot of play. It's very close to being like that again.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just recent cards that have been printed, like Fatal Push, are making it a lot harder for this card to see play. So that's why it's in the sideboard, not the main deck. And it's just an idea. It's just an experiment right now.
Yep.
And that about does it for the Blue-White Tower deck. And that about does it for our episode this week. Now, if you like this episode, make sure to share it out with your friends. You know, we're trying to get the word out there of this podcast. Again, you can always find us on SoundCloud, on iTunes, even on YouTube. We're uploading to YouTube now every week. So make sure to share that out. You can always find us on YouTube at the Wizards Brew podcast channel. Very easy to find if you just type in those words, Wizards Brew podcast. And we'll upload every Friday along with the audio episode on SoundCloud.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nothing really to discuss there. I mean, we're trying to make sure it's more regular, trying to make sure that we're putting things up on Fridays, really trying to, push the envelope and making sure that we're out there more often because, I mean, we really do enjoy what we're doing. It's definitely a passion project. We want to become we want more people to have more information from us. So by becoming bigger, more people will know about us so we can help spread the word.
Yeah, exactly. So if you are watching on YouTube, make sure to like and subscribe. If you're listening on iTunes, make sure to leave us a review. As always, you can find us on Twitter at WizBrewCast. Danny and I have our Twitters in the description. You can email us at wizardsbrewcast@gmail.com. And we'll see you guys next week.
All right, guys. Have fun.